First of all, though, adultery. Now, when he committed adultery, he had no idea that he was going to commit murder. I should say the adultery led to the murder led to other deceits. Pretty soon he loses his whole family. And you can see in David's life, he never recovered emotionally. He never regained his position of authority with his children. And sometimes when I look at the way in which his life ended, basically a very sad, defeated, bad father, though he had some marvelous qualities, he was a bad father. The simple fact is that once that sin began to grow, he reaped more than he sowed. It looked so small and innocent, but the consequences eventually were devastating. Now let me give you a third law of sowing and reaping, and this one may be the most important. Everyone listen up at this point. The law is simply this: you reap in a different season than you sow. You see, sometimes you sow and you say to yourself, well, there are no consequences. You can go and put seed in the ground and you can plant that wild oats, as people sometimes speak of it, and you go there the next day and it has not germinated. It looks as if the soil has been largely untouched and there is not a single weed or stalk of wild oats that has to be uprooted. And you say, see, there's no problem. Well, there is a problem. Because you don't reap. You don't reap when you sow. You reap after you sow. And that's why there are so many people today with all kinds of problems. Let's take, for example, the issue of immorality. I would say that at least 50% of all problems in marriages can be traced back to an immoral background. Now, at the time you say, well, it's not going to affect me. We're going to take care of this. And then suddenly you marry the person with whom you are involved, thinking that all is going to be sweetness and light. And on your honeymoon, you begin to have terrible, terrible, vicious arguments of hatred and guilt. And you say, well, where's all this coming from? Almost always it's coming from some seeds that were planted, and you don't reap in the same season that you sow. You reap a little later on. You say, well, what do you have to do about that? Well, the answer is the weeds need to be pulled out of the ground by the roots, because they will continue to grow. They will continue to bring a bitter harvest, and it will go on and on and on until the root has been pulled out through confession, through repentance, through responsibility in terms of accountability. That's how seriously we have to deal with this business that we call sin. Notice the following. People are interrelated. You can't live your life without it somehow affecting me. And I can't live mine without it affecting you. Sins are interrelated. I cannot sin neatly and say, I have it compartmentalized. I have it under control. I will determine where the boundaries are. Now, when you give yourself to sin, you'll discover that eventually that will be out of your control. Sins are related. One sin spawns another. The man in Detroit last week who took a gun and blew his head off and shot himself to death in that casino, he didn't know that when he was there gambling, that's the way this was all going to end when he began with that gambling habit. He thought he had it under control. I will bring only so much money. I will take care of this. And eventually, as he got into debt, it became worse and worse, and he took more and more to try to recoup his losses. And at the end of the day, in the casino, took out a gun and shot himself. Now, that's not what you see when you begin. But sin is interrelated. It leads from one to the other. Judgment, now we're on number 3. People are related. Sin is interrelated. Judgment is also interrelated. Now let's pick up the story of Achan. Achan, you remember, was the one who had sinned, and God told Joshua to get up from the ground and to find the sin. And in order to do that in Old Testament times, they cast lots to try to find who the culprit was. Well, you can imagine as the lots were going along the different tribes, why didn't Achan just sit at the back and say, stop it, everybody, yoo-hoo, I'm guilty, here I am. Because of shame and because of the love of sin, we will do everything we possibly can to conceal it. We will lie. We will try as best as we can to hide it so we don't have to deal with it at all. And what we want to do is to hide it under that rug, to dig it deep and to put it there and to say, this is something with which I will not deal. It has to stay there. Well, my friend, there's a verse I often quote, and that is simply this: whoso covereth his sin shall not prosper, but whosoever confesseth and forsaketh his sin will find mercy. Will you pray today that God will give us the honesty to confess and to forsake rather than to hide?
Dr. Erwin Lutzer with Part 2 of Let's Calculate the Cost of Hidden Sin, the fourth message in his series, Getting Started Right, Lessons from the Life of Joshua. Tomorrow, the sober conclusions we'll take home from the story of Achan's fateful sin. Running to Win comes to you from the Moody Church in Chicago. Getting Started Right can be yours as a 6-message CD series. The series is our thank you when you give a gift of any amount to support Running to Win. Just call 1-800-215-5001. That's 1-800-215-5001. Online, go to offerrtw.com. That's offerrtw, all one word, .com. Or write to Running to Win at Box 11174, Chicago, Illinois, 60611. This is Dave McAllister. Don't miss tomorrow's Running to Win.